There's a specific type of empath that the avoidant encounters sometimes. Someone who seems like the answer to everything their defended system has been seeking. This person understands them without explanation, accepts their patterns without judgment, provides endless patience for their withdrawal cycles, forgives their emotional unavailability repeatedly, stays present through their pushing away, offers unconditional acceptance of exactly who they are, patterns and all. This person seems perfect. Seems like the secure base their wounded self has been desperately seeking. Seems like someone who won't abandon them, won't judge them, won't require them to be different than they are. The avoidant finds this person and feels relief. Finally, someone who gets it. Someone who understands. Someone whose empathy is so vast, it can hold their defended patterns without requiring change. But here's what the avoidant doesn't realize initially. This isn't healthy empathy meeting wounded avoidant. This is toxic empathy meeting defended avoidant. And toxic empathy, empathy without boundaries, understanding without self-protection, acceptance without standards, is the avoidant's worst nightmare disguised as their answered prayer. Because toxic empathy enables every destructive pattern the avoidant has, makes those patterns sustainable when they should produce consequences, prevents the avoidant from experiencing the natural results of their behavior that would motivate genuine transformation, creates dynamic where avoidant can remain defended indefinitely because toxic empath absorbs all the damage that defended position creates. The toxic empath isn't helping the avoidant heal. The toxic empath is preventing the avoidant from ever having reason to heal by making the wounded defended state perfectly comfortable through their boundaryless accommodation. And eventually, sometimes years into this dynamic, the avoidant realizes the nightmare. They're trapped in relationship with someone whose empathy has made them worse instead of better, whose understanding has enabled their patterns instead of challenging them to transform, whose unconditional acceptance has prevented their growth instead of supporting it. The toxic empath seemed like salvation, turned out to be prison. Understanding why toxic empathy is the avoidant's worst nightmare, how toxic empaths differ from healthy empaths, why this dynamic is mutually destructive despite appearing supportive, and how both people become trapped in cycle that serves neither person's healing. This is essential for avoidants who need to understand what healthy support actually looks like, and for empaths who need to understand why boundaryless empathy ultimately harms everyone involved. What makes an empath? Toxic rather than healthy. The three critical distinctions. Not all empathy is healthy. Toxic empathy is characterized by specific patterns that distinguish it from the empathy that actually supports healing and growth. Toxic empaths have empathy without boundaries, understanding everyone's pain while neglecting their own well-being in service of others' comfort. Healthy empathy has boundaries. Healthy empath understands your pain and also maintains boundaries that protect their own well-being. Can be empathic toward your struggle while saying, I can't absorb the impact of your patterns. Can understand why you behave the way you do while enforcing consequences when that behavior harms them. Can hold space for your wounds while requiring you to do work of healing those wounds rather than expecting them to accommodate the wounds indefinitely. Toxic empathy has no boundaries. Toxic empath understands your pain and sacrifices their well-being to accommodate it. Absorbs impact of your patterns without limit, understands why you behave harmfully, and accepts the harm as price of understanding. Holds space for your wounds and never requires you to heal those wounds because requiring change would feel like judgment. The boundarylessness is what makes it toxic. Not because understanding is bad, because understanding without self-protection enables harm, allows patterns to continue that should be stopped, prevents consequences that would motivate growth. The toxic empath's boundaryless empathy feels wonderful initially to avoidant, finally someone who won't require them to change. But eventually, the boundarylessness creates nightmare. Avoidant trapped with someone who enables their worst patterns while calling it love. Toxic empaths confuse understanding why someone behaves harmfully with accepting that harmful behavior indefinitely, making empathy into enablement. Healthy empathy says, I understand why you withdraw when triggered. Your childhood taught you withdrawal was survival, and I can't stay in relationship where I'm repeatedly abandoned when I need presence. Understanding and boundary coexist. Toxic empathy says, I understand why you withdraw when triggered. Your childhood taught you withdrawal was survival. So I'll wait patiently every time you withdraw, because understanding why you do it means accepting it forever. Understanding becomes excuse for accepting harm indefinitely. This confusion between understanding causes and accepting continued harm is what makes empathy toxic. Understanding is important. Understanding why someone behaves the way they do creates compassion. But healthy empathy knows that understanding why someone harms you doesn't obligate you to continue accepting the harm. Toxic empathy believes understanding creates obligation to tolerate indefinitely. And this belief that understanding equals acceptance without time limit is what transforms empathy into enablement. The toxic empath enables avoidance patterns through confusing understanding with acceptance. Avoidance stays defended because patterns never produce consequences. Both people stay stuck because enablement prevents growth. Toxic empaths derive identity and worth from being needed, creating unconscious investment in keeping people wounded so they remain needed. Healthy empath wants you to heal, supports your growth, celebrates your developing capacity to manage your own struggles, doesn't need to be needed, can be happy for your independence. Toxic empath unconsciously needs you to stay wounded, derives sense of worth from being the understanding one, the patient one, the one who can handle what others can't handle. Their identity is built on being needed by wounded people, and this creates unconscious investment in you staying wounded. If you heal, you don't need them anymore. If you develop capacity to manage your triggers, you don't need their endless patience. If you transform, their role as understanding accommodation provider becomes obsolete. The toxic empath will never consciously acknowledge this, will genuinely believe they want you to heal. But unconsciously, they're invested in your stuckness because your stuckness is what makes them necessary. This unconscious investment means they'll enable patterns that keep you stuck while appearing to support you, will provide so much accommodation you never have to develop your own capacity, will be so understanding you never have to change. The toxic empath's need to be needed is why they're avoidance worst nightmare. They make the avoidance defended wounded state perfectly sustainable, eliminating all pressure to transform, while convincing both people this is love rather than mutual dysfunction. Why toxic empaths are attracted to avoidance, and why this attraction creates mutually destructive dynamic. Understanding what draws toxic empaths to avoidance reveals why this pairing, despite appearing complementary, actually prevents both people from healing. Avoidants provide endless opportunity to prove the toxic empath's worth through their capacity to understand and tolerate what others can't. Toxic empath is attracted to challenge, to person others can't handle, to wounded, defended person who needs understanding others can't provide. Avoidant is perfect for this, has patterns that exhaust most people, needs patience most people don't have, requires understanding that's rare. Toxic empath sees this and feels called. Finally, someone who needs what I specifically can provide. someone whose difficulty proves my exceptional capacity, someone whose patterns will validate my identity as person who can love the unlovable, understand the incomprehensible, tolerate the intolerable. The attraction isn't to the avoidant as person, it's to the avoidant as validation, as proof of toxic empath's worth, as endless project that will never be complete, because completeness would eliminate the source of worth. The toxic empath needs the avoidant to stay difficult, to stay wounded, to stay defended, because the difficulty is what proves the toxic empath's exceptional capacity. Healing would eliminate the need that validates the toxic empath's identity. The avoidant's emotional unavailability allows the toxic empath to avoid examining their own wounds by staying focused on fixing someone else. Toxic empath is avoiding something, avoiding their own wounds, avoiding their own healing, avoiding examination of why they're willing to accept so little while giving so much. Avoidance emotional unavailability is perfect distraction from this self-examination. If toxic empath is constantly focused on understanding the avoidance wounds, managing the avoidance triggers, accommodating the avoidance patterns, they never have to turn that focus inward, never have to examine their own attachment wounds, never have to ask why they're attracted to people who can't reciprocate, never have to heal their own wounds because they're too busy accommodating someone else's. The avoidance emotional unavailability is feature, not bug. Keeps the toxic empath's attention outward rather than inward. Keeps them in helper role rather than in their own healing process. The toxic empath is using the avoidant to avoid themselves, and the avoidant is using the toxic empath's accommodation to avoid transformation. Both people are avoiding. Neither is healing. Both think they're in relationship. Actually, they're in mutual avoidance pact where helping and being helped prevents both people from doing their actual work. Both people unconsciously agree. The avoidant stays wounded and defended. The toxic empath stays endlessly accommodating, and neither has to transform. The dynamic creates unspoken agreement. Avoidant agrees to stay wounded, defended, emotionally unavailable, and stuck in patterns. Toxic empath agrees to stay endlessly patient, boundlessly understanding, infinitely accommodating, and focused on the avoidance healing instead of their own. Both people get something from this agreement. Avoidant gets to avoid the discomfort of transformation while receiving support and understanding. Toxic empath gets to avoid their own healing while maintaining identity as exceptional helper. Neither person grows. Both stay stuck. But stuck feels comfortable because the agreement makes stuck sustainable. The toxic empath prevents natural consequences of avoidance patterns that would force growth. The avoidant prevents the toxic empath from turning focus inward, where their own wounds would demand attention. Both people are collaborating in mutual stuckness while calling it love. This is why toxic empath is avoidance' worst nightmare. Seems like support. Actually enables the avoidant staying in defended wounded state indefinitely, preventing the transformation that genuine support would require. The uncomfortable mirror turn. If you're the avoidant, reading this, ask yourself why you're attracted to boundaryless understanding. But if you're the avoidant reading this, examine honestly. Are you attracted to people with healthy boundaries who require you to grow? Or are you attracted to boundaryless people who accommodate your patterns indefinitely? Because the type of person you're attracted to reveals what you're actually seeking. If you're attracted to healthy empaths, people who understand you and also require you to do your work, people who have compassion for your wounds and also enforce consequences when your patterns harm them, people who support your growth and also maintain boundaries that protect themselves, you're seeking actual healing. You're seeking someone who will hold you accountable while supporting you. Someone who will challenge you to transform while understanding why transformation is hard. This attraction to boundaried empathy means you're ready or becoming ready for genuine growth. But if you're attracted to toxic empaths, people who understand everything and require nothing, people who accommodate all your patterns and never enforce consequences, people who make your defended state perfectly comfortable through their boundaryless acceptance, you're not seeking healing. You're seeking enablement. You're seeking someone who will make staying stuck comfortable. Someone who will prevent you from ever having to do uncomfortable transformation work by absorbing all the discomfort your patterns create. This attraction to boundaryless empathy means you're not ready to grow. You're seeking someone who will make not growing sustainable. Be honest with yourself about what you're attracted to. The toxic empath seems perfect because they never require you to change. But never requiring you to change means they're preventing you from ever becoming capable of healthy relationship. The healthy empath seems challenging because they require growth while providing support. But requiring growth while providing support is what actually helps you transform. Choose the challenge. Choose the person who understands you and also requires you to do your work. That's support. Boundaryless accommodation is enablement. Stop seeking enablement. Start seeking support. That's the path to actual healing. How the dynamic with toxic empath actually makes the avoidant worse, not better. The relationship with toxic empath doesn't heal the avoidance wounds. It deepens them by making defended patterns more entrenched while preventing any motivation for change. The avoidant never experiences consequences of their patterns, learning that withdrawal, unavailability, and pushing away are sustainable behaviors. Throughout relationship with toxic empath, avoidant withdraws when triggered, and toxic empath waits patiently. Avoidant is emotionally unavailable, and toxic empath accepts it understandingly. Avoidant pushes away during intimacy, and toxic empath remains present without requiring reciprocation. Every pattern continues without consequence. Withdrawal doesn't produce abandonment. Emotional unavailability doesn't produce relationship ending. Pushing away doesn't create permanent distance. The patterns are sustainable because toxic empath absorbs all the negative impact, and sustainable patterns are patterns that don't change. Why would avoidant do uncomfortable work of transformation when patterns work perfectly well? When withdrawal is tolerated, unavailability is accepted, pushing away is accommodated? The toxic empath's boundaryless acceptance teaches the avoidant. Patterns are fine. Patterns don't need to change. Patterns can continue indefinitely without producing loss. This teaching makes the avoidant worse, entrenches patterns, makes them more automatic because they're never challenged, makes transformation less likely because there's no consequence creating motivation for transformation. The boundaryless acceptance confirms the avoidance belief that relationships require self-abandonment, since toxic empath models constant self-betrayal as love. Avoidant believes relationships require losing yourself, require becoming what someone else needs, require abandoning your authentic self to meet someone else's expectations. This belief is why they're defended, why they resist intimacy, why they push away. They're protecting themselves from the self-abandonment they believe relationship requires. And then they meet toxic empath. And toxic empath confirms the belief, models constant self-abandonment as love, abandons their own needs to meet avoidance comfort, abandons their boundaries to accommodate avoidance patterns, abandons their well-being to provide endless understanding. The toxic empath is living proof that avoidance belief is correct. Relationships do require self-abandonment. Look at toxic empath abandoning themselves constantly to maintain the relationship. The avoidant watches this, learns from it, and becomes more defended. Because if this is what relationship requires, watching your partner abandon themselves for you, the avoidant wants no part of it. The toxic empath thinks their proving love is possible through their self-abandonment. They're actually confirming the avoidant's worst beliefs about relationship and making the avoidant more defended against ever being in position of having to abandon themselves the way toxic empath is abandoning themselves. The avoidant's capacity for reciprocity atrophies because toxic empath never requires reciprocation, eliminating opportunity to develop this capacity. Capacity develops through use, like muscle. Use it and it strengthens. Don't use it and it atrophies. Capacity for reciprocity, for giving back equivalent to what you receive, requires being in relationship where reciprocity is expected, where you're required to meet your partner's needs while they meet yours, where giving is mutual. But with toxic empath, reciprocity isn't expected. Toxic empath gives everything, expects minimal return, makes no demands, requires no equivalent effort. Avoidant receives boundless support and provides minimal reciprocal support, receives endless patience and provides sporadic presence, receives unconditional acceptance and provides conditional availability. The lack of requirement for reciprocity means the capacity never develops, never gets practiced, never gets strengthened. The avoidant becomes increasingly incapable of reciprocal partnership because they're in relationship that doesn't require reciprocity. The capacity atrophies, wastes away. Eventually, the avoidant becomes incapable of healthy relationship because healthy relationship requires reciprocity they've never developed. The toxic empath thinks they're being loving by not requiring reciprocation. They're actually disabling the avoidant's capacity for healthy partnership by preventing the development of reciprocal capacity through never requiring its use. What happens? When the avoidant finally realizes they're trapped, the crisis of the comfortable prison. Eventually, some avoidants realize what's happened. They're in perfectly comfortable relationship that's actually preventing them from ever becoming capable of genuine intimacy. They realize the relationship is too easy. No growth, no challenge, no requirement to evolve beyond defended patterns that were supposed to be temporary protection. The realization creeps in. This relationship is easy. Too easy. Toxic empath never challenges them, never requires them to grow, never pushes them toward transformation, just accepts, just understands, just accommodates, forever. And the ease starts feeling wrong, starts feeling like trap, because growth requires challenge, transformation requires discomfort, evolution requires being pushed beyond current capacity, and relationship with toxic empath provides none of this. Provides perfect comfort, perfect acceptance, perfect stasis. The avoidant realizes, I'm the same person I was years ago. Same patterns, same defended position, same wounds, same limitations. Nothing has changed, because nothing has had to change. The toxic empath made not changing perfectly comfortable. The realization creates crisis. Comfortable prison is still prison. Being accepted as wounded defended person feels good, but also feels like being trapped as wounded defended person. Like the acceptance is preventing the transformation that would allow moving beyond defended state into genuine capacity for intimacy. They feel simultaneously grateful and resentful. Grateful for the understanding, resentful that the understanding enabled their stuckness instead of challenging their growth. The feelings are complex. Gratitude for toxic empath's patience, for their understanding, for their unconditional acceptance. Nobody else has ever provided this level of accommodation. Nobody else has ever been this patient with the patterns. This creates genuine gratitude. But alongside gratitude is resentment. Resentment that the patients enabled staying stuck, that the understanding prevented growth, that the acceptance made transformation unnecessary. The toxic empath helped them stay exactly as they are, and staying exactly as they are means being stuck in defended, wounded state that prevents genuine intimacy. The resentment grows. Why didn't you challenge me? Why didn't you require me to grow? Why did you make staying stuck so comfortable that I had no motivation to transform? The toxic empath thinks they've been loving. The avoidant realizes they've been enabled. And the realization creates resentment toward the very accommodation they initially sought and appreciated. They want to leave but feel guilty. The toxic empath has sacrificed so much, been so understanding, that leaving feels like cruel betrayal. The crisis creates desire to leave, to get out of comfortable prison, to find relationship or situation that challenges them to grow, to stop being enabled and start being required to transform. But leaving feels impossible because toxic empath has sacrificed everything, has abandoned their own needs, has been endlessly patient, has provided unconditional acceptance. How can avoidant leave someone who's given them everything? The guilt is crushing. Feels like betrayal. Feels like cruelty. The toxic empath modeled self-abandonment and the avoidant benefited from it, and now leaving feels like discarding someone who destroyed themselves in service of the avoidant's comfort. The guilt traps them. Can't stay because staying means remaining stuck. Can't leave because leaving means being person who discarded someone who sacrificed everything for them. The avoidant is trapped in comfortable prison built by toxic empath's boundaryless sacrifice. The nightmare is complete. Seems like salvation was actually trap. Understanding was actually enablement. Love was actually mutual dysfunction that prevented both people from healing. Why both people are harmed by this dynamic, the mutually destructive nature of toxic empathy meeting defended avoidance. Understanding how this dynamic harms both people reveals why ending it, however painful, serves both people's eventual well-being. The avoidant never develops capacity for healthy relationship, staying in defended state that becomes more entrenched over time rather than transforming into capable partner. Relationship with toxic empath prevents avoidant from developing capacity, prevents them from learning to be present consistently, prevents them from developing emotional availability, prevents them from learning reciprocity, prevents them from transforming wounds into wisdom. The defended patterns become more entrenched because they're never challenged. The avoidant becomes more stuck because stuckness is perfectly comfortable. Years pass. Avoidant is still defended, still wounded, still incapable of genuine intimacy, still stuck in patterns that would have been challenged and transformed in relationship with healthy, boundaried partner. The toxic empath's boundaryless acceptance prevented the development that would have occurred if the avoidant had been required to grow. The harm is permanent developmental arrest. Avoidance stays frozen in defended state that was supposed to be temporary protection, but becomes permanent identity because relationship makes it sustainable. The toxic empath destroys themselves, abandoning their needs, ignoring their wounds, deriving worth from being needed by someone who never truly sees them. Toxic empath is also harmed, deeply harmed. They abandon themselves repeatedly, ignore their own needs to meet avoidance comfort, sacrifice their well-being to accommodate avoidance patterns, derive worth from being needed rather than from inherent value, build identity around understanding person who never reciprocates the understanding. The self-abandonment is devastating, creates resentment they can't acknowledge because acknowledging it would contradict their identity as boundlessly understanding person, creates needs they can't express because expressing needs would feel like judgment of the avoidant. Creates wounds they can't heal because they're too focused on the avoidance wounds to attend to their own. The toxic empath wastes years, wastes capacity for genuine partnership on relationship that never was partnership. Wastes empathy on person who never developed capacity to reciprocate it. Destroys themselves in service of someone who never asked for the sacrifice and wouldn't have wanted it if they'd understood the cost. The harm is complete self-abandonment in service of someone else's comfortable stuckness. Neither person heals. Both remain frozen in dysfunctional dance, where helping and being helped prevents both from doing actual transformative work. The dynamic prevents healing for both. Avoidant doesn't heal because boundaryless acceptance makes healing unnecessary. Toxic empath doesn't heal because they're focused on avoidance healing instead of their own. Both people think they're in relationship. Actually, they're in mutually reinforcing dysfunction, where both people's avoidance of their own work is enabled by the dynamic. Avoidant avoids transformation work by staying with someone who doesn't require transformation. Toxic empath avoids self-examination by staying focused on understanding someone else. Years pass. Neither heals. Both are stuck. Relationship continues. Both people remain in wounded states that relationship is enabling rather than challenging. The mutual harm is both people preventing each other from healing while appearing to support each other. Both need to end the relationship to begin actual healing, but ending feels impossible because both are invested in the dysfunction, avoidant in being accepted without transformation, toxic empath in being needed by wounded person. The nightmare is mutual. Both are trapped. Both are harmed. Both need separation to heal. Neither can leave because both are getting something from staying stuck together. What the avoidant needs. Instead of toxic empath, the difference between enablement and support. Understanding what healthy support looks like helps avoidants recognize the difference between someone who helps them stay stuck and someone who challenges them to grow. Healthy support includes understanding plus boundaries, compassion for wounds combined with consequences when patterns cause harm. Healthy supporter understands why you withdraw, understands your childhood taught you withdrawal was survival, understands the wounds that created the patterns. This understanding creates compassion. But healthy supporter also enforces boundaries. I understand why you withdraw, and I can't stay in relationship where I'm repeatedly abandoned. You need to work on this, or I need to leave. Understanding and boundary coexist. Compassion and consequence coexist. The supporter holds space for wounds while requiring work on wounds, doesn't accept patterns indefinitely, doesn't sacrifice themselves to accommodate, understands and also requires growth. This is support, not enablement. Support challenges while caring. Enablement accepts while preventing growth. Avoidant needs support, needs someone who understands them and also requires them to transform. That combination, understanding plus requirement, is what creates growth. Toxic empath provides understanding without requirement, provides compassion without consequence. This is enablement, makes staying stuck comfortable, prevents transformation. Healthy support celebrates your growth toward independence, rather than unconsciously needing you to stay wounded so they remain necessary. Healthy supporter wants you to heal, genuinely wants it, celebrates when you develop capacity to manage your triggers without them, is happy when you become more independent, doesn't need to be needed, can support your growth without feeling threatened by your increasing capacity, supports you becoming less dependent on them because your independence is goal, not threat. Toxic empath unconsciously needs your dependence, needs you to stay wounded so they remain necessary. feels threatened by your growth toward independence because independence eliminates their role. Healthy supporter has own sense of worth, independent of being needed, can support your healing without losing their identity when you heal, can be happy for your growth, even though your growth means you need them less. This is support. Support that actually serves your healing. Toxic empaths' need for you to need them is why their support prevents your healing. They unconsciously sabotage your growth because your growth threatens their identity as needed helper. Healthy support requires reciprocity, expecting you to show up for them while they show up for you, developing your capacity through practice. Healthy supporter shows up for you and also requires you to show up for them, has needs they express, has struggles they need support with, requires reciprocal partnership where both people give and receive. This requirement develops your capacity for reciprocity. You practice showing up. Practice being present for someone else's needs. Practice reciprocal care. The practice strengthens capacity. You become capable of healthy partnership because you're in relationship that requires partnership. Toxic empath never requires reciprocity, never expresses needs, never requires you to show up for them, accepts minimal return on their investment. This lack of requirement prevents development of reciprocal capacity. You never practice showing up because they never require it. You remain incapable of reciprocal partnership because you're in relationship that doesn't develop reciprocal capacity. Healthy support requires reciprocity because reciprocity is what healthy relationship is. Toxic empath's lack of requirements prevents you from developing capacity for healthy relationship by never requiring the reciprocity that would develop that capacity. The path forward for the avoidant trapped with toxic empath and why leaving is act of love for both people. Understanding that leaving serves both people helps the avoidant move past guilt and recognize that ending the mutually destructive dynamic is necessary for both people's healing. Leaving forces the avoidant to find relationship that challenges growth or to do the solo work that toxic empath's presence prevented. If avoidant leaves, they're forced to change, can't stay in comfortable stuckness anymore, have to either find relationship with healthy boundaried partner who requires transformation or do solo therapeutic work to develop capacity. Either path creates growth. Relationship with healthy partner challenges them, requires them to show up, requires reciprocity, requires transformation. Solo work develops capacity without relationship. Therapy, self-examination, healing wounds without having toxic empath to enable avoiding the work. Both paths serve the avoidant. Both create the growth that relationship with toxic empath prevented. Leaving is scary. Leaving means discomfort, but discomfort is what creates transformation. Staying comfortable with toxic empath keeps avoidant stuck. Leaving creates the conditions where growth becomes necessary. This serves the avoidant even though it's hard. Leaving forces the toxic empath to examine why they choose unavailable people, starting their own healing journey instead of avoiding it through helping others. If avoidant leaves, toxic empath loses their distraction, loses the wounded person to focus on, forced to turn attention inward where it should have been all along, forced to examine why they're attracted to emotionally unavailable people, why they derive worth from being needed, why they abandon themselves in service of others, why they enable dysfunction while calling it love. The examination is painful, but necessary. Toxic empath can't heal while focused on someone else's wounds, can only heal by examining their own. Leaving forces the examination, forces the toxic empath to start their own healing journey instead of avoiding it through endless accommodation of someone else. The leaving serves the toxic empath, even though they'll experience it as abandonment. because staying is preventing their healing. Leaving creates space for healing to begin. The guilt about leaving is based on false premise that the toxic empath's self-sacrifice creates obligation, when actually their self-sacrifice was their choice that you didn't request and shouldn't have to repay with your stuckness. The guilt is based on lie. Lie that toxic empath's sacrifice creates debt, that their self-abandonment obligates you to stay. But you never asked for the sacrifice, never asked them to abandon themselves, never asked them to have no boundaries, never asked them to enable your stuckness. They chose boundaryless accommodation, their choice, not your request, their need to be needed, not your need for them to abandon themselves, their avoidance of their own work through focusing on yours, not your requirement that they avoid themselves. You don't owe them your stuckness as repayment for their choice to enable your stuckness. You don't owe them your continued presence as price for their self-abandonment you never requested. The guilt is lie. Reject it. Their sacrifice was their choice. Your leaving is your choice. Both choices are valid. Neither creates debt. Leave. Not because you're cruel, because staying is preventing both people from healing, because comfortable prison is still prison, because enablement disguised as love is still enablement, because you deserve relationship that challenges you to grow, and they deserve to finally turn attention to their own healing instead of avoiding it through endless focus on yours. The final truth about why toxic empath is avoidance' worst nightmare. The toxic empath seems like salvation, seems like the understanding, accepting person the avoidance wounded self has been seeking. Seems like someone who will never require the painful transformation work. Seems like safe harbor where defended patterns are accepted rather than challenged. But the toxic empath is nightmare. Not because they're malicious, because their boundaryless acceptance enables the avoidance worst patterns, makes staying stuck perfectly comfortable, prevents the consequences that would motivate transformation, confirms the avoidance belief that relationships require self-abandonment by modeling constant self-abandonment, prevents development of reciprocal capacity by never requiring reciprocity, makes the avoidant worse instead of better by entrenching defended patterns through making them sustainable. The worst nightmare isn't someone who rejects you. The worst nightmare is someone whose acceptance is so boundaryless it prevents you from ever becoming capable of genuine intimacy. Someone whose understanding is so complete it eliminates all motivation for growth. Someone whose love is so accommodating it traps you in wounded state by making wounded state perfectly comfortable. That's the toxic empath. That's the nightmare disguised as answered prayer. If you're the avoidant recognizing yourself in this, recognizing you're with toxic empath, recognizing the comfortable prison, recognizing the enablement disguised as support, leave. Leave not because they're a bad person, because the dynamic is preventing both people from healing. Leave because you deserve relationship that challenges you to grow rather than enables your stuckness. Leave because they deserve to finally focus on their own healing rather than avoid it through endless accommodation of yours. Leave because comfortable prison is still prison and you deserve freedom more than you deserve comfort. The guilt will be enormous. The fear will be real. Leave anyway. That's the path to actual healing, not finding someone who accepts your patterns, finding someone who understands your patterns and requires you to transform them, or doing the solo work to transform yourself. Either path requires leaving the toxic empath who makes transformation unnecessary by making stuckness sustainable. And if you're the toxic empath reading this, recognizing yourself in the boundaryless accommodation, in the identity built on being needed, in the self-abandonment you call love, develop boundaries. Start choosing yourself. Start requiring reciprocity. Start expressing your needs. Start enforcing consequences when patterns harm you. Transform your toxic empathy into healthy empathy by adding the boundaries that make empathy sustainable rather than self-destructive. Stop deriving worth from being needed by wounded people. Derive worth from your inherent value as person worthy of reciprocal love. Stop focusing on others' wounds to avoid your own. Start your own healing journey. The transformation is hard. The examining is painful. Do it anyway. That's the path from toxic empathy to healthy empathy, from enabler to supporter, from self-abandoner to boundaried lover. Both people in this dynamic are trapped. Both people are harmed. Both people deserve better. Leaving or transforming the dynamic is act of love for both people. Choose love. Choose growth. Choose healing over comfortable stuckness. That's the path. For both of you. Take it.